When he heard the manager laugh, he stayed calm. But 60 seconds later, the entire room was stunned. It was one of those crisp Saturday mornings when the sun hits the chrome just right, making even the dust on the pavement look glamorous. Malcolm Harris stood on the sidewalk, coffee in hand, the warm steam fighting a losing battle against the autumn chill. He wasn't in a rush. Saturdays were his sacred time. No deadlines, no board meetings, no calls from anxious clients. Just him, his playlist of old-school jazz humming in his earbuds, and the quiet satisfaction that came from a week well-lived. Then he saw her, an elderly woman in a bright red coat, clutching 2 grocery bags like they were filled with bricks, was struggling across the dealership parking lot. The bags swung wildly with every shaky step, and from the way she leaned forward, Malcolm knew she wasn't going to make it without help. People passed her by, heads down, too consumed by their phones to notice, or maybe they just didn't care. Malcolm did. He pulled the earbuds out, slid his coffee onto the hood of his car, and jogged over. "Ma'am, let me give you a hand," he said, his voice warm but firm. The woman looked up, startled at first, then relief softened her wrinkled face. "Oh, thank you, son," she murmured, her voice trembling like dry leaves in the wind. "No trouble at all," Malcolm replied, grabbing the bags with ease. They were heavier than they looked, filled with canned goods and who knows what else. "Where to?" "That blue sedan, right over there," she said, pointing toward the edge of the lot. As they walked, Malcolm noticed the way her shoes scuffed the pavement, soles worn down to almost nothing. It made him think about his own grandmother, God rest her soul, and how she used to insist on carrying everything herself, even when her hands shook like tuning forks. He smiled, remembering those stubborn eyes and that fierce pride. He opened the car door for the woman, placed the bags gently on the back seat, and closed it with a reassuring click. "You're a blessing," she said, patting his hand with a touch so light it felt like a whisper. "Just doing what's right," Malcolm replied, tipping an imaginary hat like he'd seen in old movies. She chuckled, and for a second, the world felt like it should. Kind, simple, decent. That feeling lasted about 2 minutes. As Malcolm turned back toward his car, he noticed the gleaming glass facade of Hamilton Luxury Motors staring him down like a polished fortress. Inside, rows of high-end vehicles sat like royalty, their metallic curves basking under soft white lights. He'd been meaning to upgrade his ride for months now, something reliable but with enough punch to make long drives feel like a reward, not a chore. He'd researched, checked prices, even got pre-approval from his bank. Today was the day. He walked toward the glass doors, straightening his jacket, brushing a speck of lint from his sleeve. He wasn't dressed flashy, dark jeans, a crisp button-down, clean sneakers, but he looked sharp enough, respectable. The kind of man you'd expect to walk out with a new set of keys and a smile. The moment he stepped inside, the smell hit him. New leather, polished chrome, and that faint tang of industrial cleaner that screams, "Money lives here." The showroom was buzzing softly with murmurs of sales talk, the hum of printers spitting out contracts, the faint clink of coffee cups in a corner lounge. Everything about this place said opulence with a side of arrogance. Malcolm took it all in, nodding slightly. "Nice," he muttered to himself, his voice low and smooth, like a sax riff at midnight. But the serenity didn't last, because then he saw him. The man was hard to miss. Slick gray suit, hair gelled within an inch of its life. A smile so sharp it could slice through tempered glass. Rick Dalton, sales manager. His name tag announced it proudly, like it was a badge of honor. Rick had the kind of confidence that wasn't earned but inherited, passed down like an old watch. The kind that says, "I've never had to wonder if I belong here." Rick's eyes swept the room like a security camera. Quick, calculating, always searching for his next big commission. When they landed on Malcolm, something shifted. The smile didn't disappear, but it tightened, the way a man clenches his jaw when he bites into something sour. Malcolm felt it immediately, that subtle static in the air, the silent math going on behind Rick's eyes. Dark skin, plain clothes, probably just browsing. Malcolm had seen that look before. Hell, he'd grown up watching that look follow his father around department stores, watching clerks hover like bees around honey they didn't want him to touch. Different time, same damn story. Rick led the way through the polished maze of Hamilton luxury motors like a man marching to a private victory. His shoes clicked against the floor, sharp and confident, echoing through the showroom like a metronome of arrogance. Malcolm followed at an easy pace, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He wasn't rattled, yet, but something inside him simmered low, like a kettle on the edge of boiling. The glass-walled office they entered looked like it had been ripped from a corporate catalog. Sleek black desk, leather chairs that swallowed you whole, a wall-mounted screen looping the dealership's latest promo video. Behind the desk sat another man, a younger version of Rick, all slicked hair and forced charm, typing furiously on a keyboard. He looked up, eyes flickering over Malcolm like a scanner at the grocery store. Rick gestured grandly to a chair. "Have a seat," he said, that smile still glued to his face like a bad tattoo. Malcolm sank into the leather, crossing one leg over the other. The chair was comfortable, sure, but it squeaked faintly. A tiny imperfection in a world obsessed with perfection. Funny how even luxury couldn't hide its flaws. Rick slid into his own chair and flipped open a pristine folder. "Now," he said, drawing out the word like a man savoring a secret, "you've got excellent taste. That sedan? A real beauty. But she doesn't come cheap. We're talking high-end features, advanced tech, luxury trim. You know, the works." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Sounds like you're trying to convince me not to buy it," he said, voice smooth as melted chocolate. Rick chuckled, but his eyes stayed sharp. "Not at all. Just being upfront. We've had situations before. People bite off more than they can chew." There it was again, the assumption, slick and shiny, hiding under the velvet of just being upfront. Malcolm let the silence stretch, his gaze steady, unblinking. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice dropping low. "Rick, you ever notice how the word assume starts trouble?" Rick blinked, clearly not expecting philosophy at 10 in the morning. "I'm just doing my job," he said. "Right," Malcolm replied, his smile razor-thin. "And I'm just doing mine, making sure I get what I came for." The next 30 minutes played out like a bad sitcom. Rick rattled off specs, horsepower, torque, safety ratings, his voice all gloss and no soul. Malcolm listened, nodding occasionally, though half his attention was on the undercurrent in the room. Every time Rick said, "Are you sure you're interested in this model?" Or, "You know, we have some more practical options." The air grew heavier. Practical. The word slithered around like a snake, coiled tight with meaning. Practical for who, exactly? Malcolm wondered. For someone like me? For someone you think can't play in this league? He pictured his father again, standing in a hardware store years ago, wearing his Sunday best because he believed respect was earned through presentation. watching a clerk pretend not to see him while helping everyone else? Malcolm had been 13, fists balled in his pockets, promising himself he'd never let anyone make him, or anyone who looked like him, feel small again. And here it was. Different stage. Same script. Rick leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers like a man about to deliver gospel. "So, Mr. Harris," he said, pronouncing the name with exaggerated politeness, "let's talk payment. Most of our clients in this tier prefer financing. You know, spread out the cost, makes it manageable." Malcolm's brow arched. "Manageable?" he repeated slowly, tasting the word like vinegar. "Of course," Rick said, smiling wider. "Unless, of course, you're planning on—" He stopped himself, but the sentence dangled there, unfinished, like a trap half-sprung. Malcolm tilted his head. "Planning on what?" Rick cleared his throat. "Well, paying in full. That'd be unexpected." Malcolm's laugh cracked through the air, low and sharp. "Unexpected," he echoed, his tone dripping with something heavier than sarcasm. "Rick, you keep talking like that, people are going to start thinking you don't believe I belong here." Rick's smile faltered. Just a flicker, quick as a camera flash, but enough. "That's not what I'm saying," he said hastily. "Sure sounds like it," Malcolm replied, his voice calm, but his eyes burning steady. The younger man behind the desk, the one who'd been pretending to work, shifted uncomfortably. His fingers stilled on the keyboard, his gaze darting between Malcolm and Rick like a spectator at a heavyweight fight. The tension in the room was thick enough to spread on toast. Rick cleared his throat again and tapped the keyboard with unnecessary force. "Why don't we run a quick credit check?" he said, too brightly, like a man tossing a match into gasoline. Malcolm's lips curled in a slow smile. "Of course," he said. "Run it. Let's all sleep better tonight, knowing if I'm good enough for your cars." Rick flinched at the words, but he forced another smile. "It's standard procedure," he muttered. "Sure it is," Malcolm said, his tone cool as the showroom's marble floor. They ran the check. Malcolm sat there, arms folded, watching Rick's expression shift as the numbers rolled in. First smugness, then surprise, then something that looked dangerously close to discomfort. "Well," Rick said finally, his voice cracking like a cheap record, "looks like you qualify." Malcolm grinned, slow and lethal. "Qualify," he repeated softly. "Good to know I passed your little test." Rick opened his mouth, but Malcolm wasn't done. "You know what's funny?" he said, leaning forward until his shadow spilled across the desk. "You talk about qualifying like you're the gatekeeper to something holy. But here's reality, Rick. I didn't come here to beg for access. I came here to buy, and last I checked, my money spends the same as anyone else's." The younger salesman shifted again, the squeak of his chair loud in the silence that followed. Rick's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming against the desk like angry little soldiers. Charles gestured to a chair. "Please, sit," he said. Malcolm sat, slow and steady, his eyes never leaving the older man's face. "I owe you an apology," Charles began, his tone smooth, diplomatic. "What happened out there is not how we conduct business." Malcolm tilted his head, a humorless smile tugging at his lips. "Really?" he said. "Because it looked pretty practiced to me." Charles's jaw tightened. He folded his hands on the desk, the gold of his wedding band gleaming under the lights. "Rick made assumptions," he said carefully. "Unacceptable ones. And for that, I am deeply sorry." Malcolm leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low and lethal. "Assumptions don't just fall out of the sky, Charles," he said. "They're taught. They're reinforced. They're the air in this building, And don't you tell me you can't smell it? Charles swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing like a buoy in a storm. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Malcolm saw it. The flicker of shame, the crack in the armor of wealth and power. Then Charles exhaled slowly, like a man deflating. "You're right," he said finally, "and I intend to make this right." Malcolm smiled then, not wide, not warm, but something sharper, hungrier. "Good," he said softly, "because I didn't come here for an apology, Charles. I came here for respect, and let me tell you, respect looks a lot like accountability." Charles nodded once, curt and controlled. "Consider it done," he said. "Rick will no longer represent this dealership, effective immediately." Malcolm arched a brow, the corners of his mouth curling. "Swift justice," he murmured. "Guess it's easier when the cameras aren't rolling, huh?" Charles flinched again, and Malcolm let the silence stretch before delivering the final cut. "Here's what's going to happen," Malcolm said, his voice calm, commanding. "You're going to finalize the sale on that sedan. Full price, no games, no conditions. And then you're going to make sure every person who walks through those doors knows they're welcome, whether they roll up in a hoodie or a three-piece suit. You think you can manage that, Charles?" Charles nodded slowly, the weight of defeat settling on his shoulders like an old coat. "Yes," he said quietly. "I can." Malcolm stood, smooth and deliberate, his shadow stretching long across the mahogany floor. "Good," he said, "because respect, it's the only luxury worth paying for." The paperwork was done in silence, punctuated only by the scratch of pens and the hum of a printer spitting out promises. When Malcolm finally walked out, keys in hand, the entire showroom turned to watch. Rick was gone, vanished like a bad memory, and every pair of eyes in that gleaming glass palace tracked Malcolm's every step. He paused by the sedan, the black paint gleaming like midnight oil, and slid into the driver's seat. The leather hugged him like it knew his name. He gripped the wheel, turned the key, and the engine roared to life, a sound so deep and smooth it felt like a victory hymn. As he pulled out of the lot, Malcolm caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time that day, he smiled. A real smile, bright and unbroken. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is rolling away in the car they swore you couldn't own.